From the number 3 overall pick to a league-wide bust to the Super Bowl, Sam Darnold. I want to ask this question. Should Sam Darnold reaching the Super Bowl change how NFL teams handle quarterbacks?
I think so. And I think it has already. I think there's always been a need for, let's call it a middle class of NFL quarterbacks that's needed to exist. And a large part of the problem has been, honestly, just the way the contracts have been structured and the way that every time somebody comes up for a new contract, they have to set the market. Right? That term, set the market, set the market. I've never liked that term because to me, it doesn't make sense. The person that should set the market is the best quarterback. The person that should set the market after that is the second best quarterback. And then some, and then some, and then some. And that's why the Dallas Cowboys are in the position they're in right now, because they paid Dak Prescott to be the number 1 quarterback, and they paid him significantly more than what other quarterbacks are making. And it puts them in a tough spot with the salary cap. I'm not saying that Dak should be in the middle class, but I'm saying that Dak is definitely and should not be the number 1 paid quarterback in the NFL. And that has become a problem based off of, and it's not just with quarterbacks, it's happened across the league, but it's worse with quarterbacks when you're talking about the amount of money, right? When you see a whole pie and you've got this much money to work with a salary cap, the quarterback takes up the most. And I think that the Sam Darnold in tandem with what we've seen happen with Baker Mayfield, with other quarterbacks, can hopefully create what I will call a middle class of the NFL, which is to say, you are not situation proof. And to be fair, there are very few quarterbacks, if any, that are situation proof. It is all about what's around you. And this situation with Sam Darnold is a perfect example of that. This year, has he been better than he was statistically last year? No. He wasn't, but he's now playing in a Super Bowl. He should continue to be paid as a middle-class quarterback because he's not better than the top 5, top 10 guys just because he's going to play in a Super Bowl. And I'm hopeful that this will create a trend that helps make this middle class of the NFL quarterbacks happen because it's needed to happen for some time.
I'm gonna toss it right back to you, and I'm gonna ask you, what do you think the process is for fixing this, right? How do you fix this? Because does Sam Darnold then run and ask to be the highest paid quarterback, right? Like, how do you fix this and adjust this situation overall?
There's going to be some cat and mouse that has to happen, and there's also going to have to be some wherewithal or some confidence from these general managers and these owners to push chips to the middle and go, okay, go ahead and get it somewhere else. Because the reality is Sam Darnold is should not be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL because he's not the best quarterback in the NFL. And we know that. He's a good quarterback. He's a quarterback you can win with. But I think if Sam Darnold is honest with himself, he knows if he goes and leaves for the next situation, is he going to start to head back on the other way as far as legacy goes? And I think this is going to have to come because every agent always wants the most for their guy. And that makes sense, right? And I understand that. But at the end of the day, I've always said these owners and these general managers have to have the confidence to say, listen, go test the market. Go see what happens. Because if you go test the market, a lot of times you're going to find out really quickly what you think you're going to get paid and what is reality are very far apart. And that needs to start happening amongst all NFL GMs, head coaches, and owners. And I anticipate coming off of this Super Bowl, it will be a hot topic when we get to the NFL owners meetings in March.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely going to be a hot topic. But I want to go to this point, right? Because the Sam Darnold thing is interesting in itself, right? Because you look at the Minnesota Vikings, right? And they fired their general manager. And it's because we thought that essentially it came down to who has to be responsible for not signing Sam Darnold to a long-term contract, right?
Yep.
That's what it came down to. The minute Sam Darnold reached the Super Bowl, somebody said, you know what? Somebody needs to be fired around here.
Yep.
And that's what happened. So I wonder if it starts to shift the other way to where do the quarterbacks have even more leverage now, do you think, because of the Sam Darnold situation to get paid? But I'm going to leave that question, but I do agree with you with this because I'm going to throw out some stats here, right? And some stats and just looking at some pure numbers. And when I look at the highest paid quarterback, right, I look at Dak Prescott, hasn't been to a Super Bowl. I look at Josh Allen, hasn't been to a Super Bowl. Jordan Love hasn't been to a Super Bowl. Trevor Lawrence hasn't been to a Super Bowl. Tua Tagovailoa hasn't been to a Super Bowl. Justin Herbert hasn't been to a Super Bowl. That is 7, I believe, of the top 10 quarterbacks that earning the highest average per year that
Correct.
haven't been to the Super Bowls, right?
Yep.
So the dynamic of how to make the Super Bowl is way deeper than just a quarterback. And if you believe that it's way deeper than just a quarterback, then you don't need to break the bank for the quarterback. Can you pay them good money? Yes, but I always say this. My pay scale is what? You pay great players great money, good players good money, average players average money, and the bad ones, you hopefully don't have to pay them at all, right? And
Yep.
that's just how it goes. So I agree with you with that. The only thing is I'm nervous about is what I just prefaced, and I want to ask you, how do we work through the minutia of that, right? Because the Sam Darnold thing could be twofold. I think it could help our point, but I also think that people are going to point into the Minnesota Vikings and say, y'all effed up. Y'all should have gave him as much money as possible.
So I think the reality is two things coming off of what you said there. One, let's address
Yep.
the Minnesota Vikings situation. There's a culmination of factors that came into that firing. One, not drafting a single Pro Bowler over a period of time. Two, it's not only the Sam Darnold conversation, it's the confidence in JJ McCarthy conversation, right? And that matters because there was a way to which you could have had both. You could have sat JJ, you could have started Sam, and you could have been in a transitional period. That was not what they were willing to do, which is why they are in the situation they are in. But the bigger point here is the quarterbacks you all named. I think that is what is finally going to start to shine a light because half of those guys, teams are trying to get out of those deals. Not, hey, I hope it works. They're trying to get out of the Tua deal. They're trying to get out of the Kyler Murray deal. They're trying to get, these are guys that they're actively trying to get off their rosters. And that is because Jordan Love, another one, that timing of that contract was very hard for the Packers. It put the Packers in a very tough situation. They only saw him start for one season. He had one really good playoff game. And since then, he hasn't had a single great performance in the postseason, and he hasn't been as good as he was his first year. If you went and asked the Packers on a lie detector test whether or not they wish they could have that moment back, I bet your ass they wish they could because they paid him based off of a short sample size. And the point is to have the first 5 years, that whole rookie contract to make deals. And unfortunately, Tua situation, half of that time, more than half that time, he was horrible. You paid him based off of the best. You need to come to the average. What have you been for all of it? In the same way that we evaluate tape, right? When you talk about Garrett Nussmeier, you're factoring in 2024, just like you're factoring in 2025. The NFL needs to adopt the same situation. You cannot throw out the bad tape and only pay them off the good tape. And that's exactly what's been going on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it'll be interesting to see where the NFL, right, as far as ownership and general managers fall with this conversation, because I think it's a two-folded thing, right? Like you can look at it from both angles, but I'm always of the ilk and agree that, listen, quarterbacks are a very important piece to this, right?
Yep.
But assigning them for the sole responsibility of wins and losses, we see that that's not a successful recipe, right? And you look at Josh Allen, right? But you also look at the fact that Peyton Manning was with Indianapolis Colts for 14, 15 years and only has one Super Bowl. You look at Phillip Rivers, who has Hall of Fame stats, but never been to a Super Bowl. You look at Matt Ryan, who has Hall of Fame stats, but didn't win a Super Bowl. We can go down the list of quarterbacks that have gaudy numbers, but at times didn't have great teams and they fell short. So just paying your quarterback all of the money, right, especially if they potentially didn't deserve it, doesn't necessarily put you in the ilk of being a Super Bowl contender.
Yep.
I think this is the bigger part, though, Paige Dimakos, because I really did some thinking with this conversation, right? And in my opinion, what happened was this for the NFL. I thought that when as you see the quarterback salaries rise, right? As the quarterback salaries they rose over this period of time, we started to see something else. The running back salaries go down, right? And when you think about the 80s and the 90s, right? If you think about your Chicago Bears and the 85 Bears, who was the face of that franchise? Walter Payton, right? You think of the times of the Earl Campbells, right? And running backs that really dominated the TV, the limelight. And I think at some point the NFL, to be able to appeal to a larger audience, or maybe even their target audience, quote unquote, they shifted to quarterbacks, right? And they shifted to quarterbacks, guys that interview well, things of that nature, and they shifted away from running backs. Now, what happened with that meant was you had to start paying the quarterbacks more money.
Yep.
So I wonder if the NFL is going to then turn around and kind of kick themselves and say, hey, this is not necessarily a winning recipe to like us projecting the story that quarterbacks are the end-all be-all when it comes to winning football games.
Because you brought up the 85 Bears, but I'll bring up an even more recent example of that, right? The 90s Cowboys. Who else was
Mm-hmm.
paid up at the high amount like Troy Aikman? Emmitt Smith. And
Emmitt
that
Smith,
was because Emmitt Smith was arguably as important as Troy Aikman was to that team and that team's success. And when you appoint just to a singular player, like the quarterback, you're following a model that does not work. It is not successful, and it hasn't been successful. Because look at the Tom Brady eras. During Tom Brady's long stretch of being paid, he was never the highest paid quarterback. Never. Patrick Mahomes, not the highest paid quarterback. I'm telling you that there's going to have to be a come to terms from both sides in that I'm here to win and I care the most about winning. And to do that, to put a roster out that's going to be able to win, you can't set the market every time because Dak Prescott, I'm sure, sits there and goes, you know what would be better for your legacy long term and quite frankly would make you more money when you think about it? Winning a Super Bowl for the Dallas Cowboys, not being the highest paid quarterback. And that's great for him to be able to say, hey, I set the market. You know what sounds a lot better? I'm a Super Bowl champ. That sounds a lot better to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And there's going to be, like I said, a lot to unfold from this because I think there's a lot of dynamics that goes into this thought process. And for NFL general managers, I hope that they start to realize this, that finding a good quarterback is only half of the steps, right? It's only half of the process. You still have to field a really good roster, and that's what the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen are figuring out right now. But